For WorldatWork and WorkSpan TV, I'm Ryan Johnson. I'm joined in the studio today by Greg Lawler of Avery Dennison, and I also have Dominic Andwan from Stryker. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
The topic today is long-term incentive plans, LTIPs. So, Dominic, why don't we just start with you with a simple definition of what LTIPs are?
Approximately 75% of companies, according to Towers Watson's data, have long-term incentive plans, which would be stock options, RSUs, or performance shares in some combination. And about 60% of companies have moved to performance-based programs. So it's a topic that's of interest to many companies who've moved into this space or who will likely be coming into it within the next few years.
So Greg, I'm obviously familiar with LTI, but long-term incentive plan is a little bit different. LTI has a longer term orientation, unless I'm wrong about that, and an LTIP is a shorter duration, more of a 3-year plan. Is that correct?
That's right. So think of it like a bonus plan or an annual bonus plan, which most companies have or are familiar with. An LTIP, or a long-term incentive plan, will be about a 3-year period typically. I've seen other companies use 2 years and some out to 4 years, but typically it's over a 3-year performance period.
And what's the primary reason for the 3-year duration versus a 7 or a 10-year duration?
In a lot of ways, that's consistent with strategic planning processes that companies are having. So they want to do their annual budgeting process, but they want to look beyond just the current quarter or even that year. And so they're looking out and saying, where's our strategic direction? 3 years is typically about as far as somebody or a company can really look out and set some reasonable goals or feel comfortable about those goals.
And Dominic, this is a stock-based plan predominantly. Am I correct about that?
Correct. These would be full value shares that would be settled based on performance of the company, things like earnings growth, sales growth, total shareholder return, but it settles in shares of the company typically.
And that's actually a good point of reference, because at Avery Dennison, we had a cash-based plan that we transitioned out of into performance shares. And one of the issues that we faced was, and actually one of the key drivers for these LTIP plans, is the idea that you want to pay for performance. And there was a view when it was cash-based, and particularly if you're using internal measures like sales or EPS, that potentially you could have a situation where that there would be a payout on those internal measures, and there would be a cash payout. However, the shareholders hadn't necessarily benefited, and so now you're seeing more and more companies, including ours at Avery Dennison, moving to share-based plans as opposed to the cash.
So I'm just curious, in your plan, do you have an annual cash bonus in addition to the LTIP, in addition to the LTI, maybe the 8 or 10-year option, and the RSUs, or are you using that whole combination, or are you just using a few elements?
No, we're using the full combination. We've got an annual bonus plan, and then it depends at the different executive levels where the different plans play into effect. But typically for our top 100 executives at Avery Dennison, out of an employee base of 32,000, they'd have a bonus plan, they'd have stock options, some portion of RSUs, and the LTIP. And the LTIP actually represents about 40% of the overall total of long-term incentives.
And how are the shareholder groups like ISS, Glass Lewis, how are they viewing these kinds of tools?
We think that the shareholder groups and the board of directors are really the ones pushing for increased performance focus within long-term incentives. You'll see a lot of folks with ISS, TIAA-CREF, others who are advocating specific performance periods, specific performance measures and such. So there's a lot of pressure that is on management teams to respond to the compensation committee and the board of directors' requests to heighten the performance requirements within their programs to be accountable to shareholders. And I think both of our companies have taken steps, one more recently and one in redesigning from a past program to accomplish that outcome.
Are there specific, Greg, do you see specific companies or industries that use this tool more frequently than others, or would you not recommend this in a certain situation perhaps?
It's not that I would say it's not right for any one in particular company or industry, but where I'd see a particular challenge is a startup type company where they haven't had a good experience or don't have good experience or exposure to setting goals beyond an annual type situation. The goal setting process can be difficult. You're setting goals in effect 3 years out, and if you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, that would be a company I would strongly suggest not putting in an LTIP.
And I would agree that the goal-setting process is really the nexus of the issue here. You've got the board and their expectations around the goals that they'd like to see, which are largely, hopefully, aligned with what the shareholder expectations are. But then you have a dynamic of the participant perspective and whether they see those goals as challenging or easier and what the right mix of those is. That's really the key issue after you get past all the technical, the tax, accounting, design considerations, is what is the goal that is most appropriate for the performance period. And I think in my experience and the discussions with Greg, that's really a critical issue that you need to get all the stakeholders' perspectives aligned around.
And what's your experience with the participants in these plans? I mean, is it extraordinarily positive, or is it just another plan that they're getting and they're happy to have another plan?
You know, it depends on the cycle in a lot of ways. If people feel like they have a chance of making the payout, there's a lot more interest, I mean, to be honest. But I've found that it actually has been a real effective tool in getting people to think beyond just the annual planning cycle. Because they're forced not only as they go through the strategic planning process to think not only what are they saying and what are they committing to, but they're also tying it to their rewards. And so I think as we've gone through the process, as we said, you know, had many more cycles, it's definitely taken hold. But I would say that the first couple of years, it was a challenge getting people to focus on it.
Yeah, for Stryker's participants, it's actually been a nice outcome in that it's given us another mechanism through which we can take performance measures that we might have typically focused within the annual bonus program, and now we have another area where we can be adding performance into, because we were historically a stock option only based company up until 2009 when we started to take a look at RSUs and PSU type programs. And so we now have an opportunity to put things that probably should have been longer term focused performance measures into this new mechanism for us, whereas in the past we might have been trying to put 2, 3, 4 things within an annual program, and that created a lot of shorter bandwidth within one program.
Another thing that we've learned too is really looking back at what we said 3 years ago, particularly as we're doing annual plans. So it's starting to feed into our annual planning process so that there truly is that overlap. So people don't feel like each and every year is a new year from a goal setting process. So we're not setting 3-year goals out and then not looking at those again until it's time to actually judge performance. So I think that's also been a real positive for us to really interrelate the comp process with the planning process and making sure that they're consistent.
So if I'm an exec comp practitioner in a company like yours, considering implementing one of these LTIP plans, what's sort of the first thing or 2 or 3 things that I should be thinking about or doing before I implement this?
Well, my advice would be it's a very long project. You need a good project manager, and there's a lot of detail and things that you'll need to look at because you really have a great amount of stakeholders. You've got your folks from tax, accounting, legal, stock plan administration, financial planning and analysis teams around goal setting, as well as you've got the board of director perspectives, your CEO's perspective, your HR leadership's perspective. So there's a lot of discussions around what is the right design features in all these things, which most practitioners could design a program in fairly short order, but it's the socialization across that broad group that's the real trick in implementing one of these programs. I think has been both Greg and I's collective experience in our discussions. I would say have a good project manager, give yourself more time than you think it's going to need because there's a lot of twists and turns in that socialization process, and be prepared to get into a lot of detail.
And then of course communications is always the tough part, isn't it?
I was going to just really reinforce the socialization, not only in terms of just the overall development, but actually the implementation is key to have your CEO, and if possible even a board communication around why this is important.
We'll end it on that note. Gentlemen, really appreciate your time. Dominic Andwan from Stryker and Greg Lawler from Avery Dennison. I want to thank you guys. And for WorldatWork TV and WorkSpan, I'm Ryan Johnson.